Now we're getting ready for the next segment of this podcast, and it is what I call rapid fire album reviews. So how this segment of the show works is I take all of the albums that were released in this month that I listened to, review them in a rapid fire fashion, so quick little 1 minute, 1.5 minute reviews, and await all your hate in the comments. So the first January 2023 album we are reviewing is Obituary's Dying of Everything. So I just want to say this right out of the gate, I have never been a fan of Obituary. Even their supposedly landmark albums like Slowly We Rot or The End Complete, I thought they were just good. Nothing great. I respect them for being one of the early death metal pioneers, but outside of that, I was always more of a Deicide and Cannibal Corpse guy. Dying of Everything has been getting a lot of praise in the Discords I'm in, as well as from my fellow YouTubers, and I gotta say this album is solid. Yeah, it's solid. Nothing more, nothing less. There's some good songs and there's some not so good songs. Good riffs, forgettable riffs. It's solid. Unfortunately, solid is as far as this album goes. When I'm comparing this Obituary album to everything in the modern death metal scene, there are tons of modern death metal bands like Venom Prison, Shadow of Intent, Hath, Ripped to Shreds, and Undeath who run circles around these guys, both in terms of skill and songwriting. There's definitely some good songs on this album, like The Wrong Time, War, which has a really good groove to it. The title track has an anthemic structure to it, which I do like, and has a really groovy main riff. Unfortunately, none of the good stuff on this album rises above anything beyond just being good, and all the good stuff is weighed down by the more by the numbers and even forgettable stuff. While this is overall a solid album, it's just another death metal album released by a legacy act, and in my opinion, nothing really more. That being said, listen to the song War. That's a good one. And the next album up for reviews is Antiflag's The Lies They Tell Our Children. This is Antiflag's first album since 2020's 2020 Vision, and the punk rock legends show no signs of slowing down or aging. This album doesn't really give us anything we haven't heard before, but in Antiflag's case, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, just fuck the man even harder. They bring in a lot of guest stars on this, including Shane Todd of Silverstein, Jesse Leach of Killswitch, and Tim McIlrath of Rise Against, and they all fill up their backup vocal roles on this album well. This band is almost like the Cannibal Corpse of punk in my opinion. They haven't really changed their formula since they started, but they don't really need to. The government will never stop pissing them off, and thus they will never have to reinvent their wheel. And that's okay. That being said, I like the first half of this album more than the second half, even if the second half is still decent. I think most punk bands have this habit of front-loading their albums with all of their best material instead of spreading it out throughout the album's runtime, so it's something I'm kinda used to in this case. That's really my only big complaint here. If you want a good punk rock album by a legendary band that hasn't lost their mojo, this is the album for you. And up next is Funeral Doom Star's AHAB with The Choral Tombs. Not gonna lie, I'm not the biggest doom metal fan. There are some exceptions like Black Sabbath and early Candlemass, but overall this genre can be a real slog for me at times. And this album sadly falls into the slog category for me. Doom metal, and funeral doom metal as well, is a genre that is way too trapped in its own rules, and it doesn't allow itself room to grow beyond its inherent Black Sabbath worship, and this album is no different, sadly. Its runtime is more bloated than I am at a Chinese restaurant, and it spends most of that time plodding along with predictable melodies, overly simplistic riffs, drumming that would put its own drummer to sleep, dime a dozen death growls, and the most sleep-inducing cleans this side of Maynard James Keenan. None of the songs really stand out for me, and they go on about 9 minutes longer than any of them really should. I appreciate what the band is trying to go for, which is to be a very soothing, alone in your room at 3 a.m. and need to unwind type of band, but this just really isn't my thing. Sorry, Questy, but this album is a no from me, dog. So, on to blackened funeral doom that's actually good. The next album is from an independent Russian black metal artist by the name of Rye. The album is called BCE. I'm not sure what that translates to in English, so forgive me. But anyways, this album is sort of an ambient, funeral doomy black metal album, and even though these genres aren't really my thing, I was surprised by this album. You know, there's good stuff and there's dog shit in every genre. Sometimes you just gotta dig for the good stuff, or more accurately, be introduced to the good stuff by people in your Discord who are way more knowledgeable than you are. As I've always said, I value songwriting and execution over every other aspect of music, and thankfully, none of the experimental ambience or depressive elements take away from the songs being played. The melodies are beautiful, the loud parts and quiet parts happen at the right times, and they're dynamic enough to keep your attention. And while it doesn't really break the mold in terms of originality, it's done well enough that it doesn't really matter. My only real criticism is that the songs are a little samey on the album, but that's to be expected because these genres have a very limited palette. This was a very pleasant surprise from an artist I've never heard before in a genre I'm not a real fan of. Rye is definitely on my radar now. And the last January release I am reviewing is Katatonia's Sky Void of Stars. This is the 12th studio album by these Swedish metal icons, and the band seems to be showing their age, unfortunately. Honestly, at most points during this album, I was getting the same feelings as when I heard Iron Maiden's Senjutsu, a tired slog of an album made by an aging band well past its prime and nothing much else to offer the scene. The only difference here is the songs are mercifully much shorter, so thank you for that at least. The last thing we need is grandpas giving us 10-minute songs. There are a couple of decent tracks on here like Drab Moon, Austerity, and Author, but overall I find the album to be mid. Mid songs, mid riffs, mid vocals, mid drumming, and ultimately a mid album. It sounds like any other doomy, proggy goth album out there. I'd suggest skipping this one if you haven't gotten around to this yet. So sorry about this, but Katatonia wins my most disappointing album of January award. Alright, so that's it for my January album reviews. Rye wins the month for me. Seriously, check that one out. Anyways, before I move on, I want to let you know which albums I'll be reviewing and anticipating for February. So the albums I'll be reviewing next month, but not really anticipating, are as follows. Saggy Sugar Bong with Homicidal Ecstasy. Honestly, I just wasn't really a big fan of the last one, and I'm not really looking forward to this one either, but I like to give everything a fair chance, so I will be reviewing Homicidal Ecstasy. I'm also going to be reviewing Foregone by In Flames, even though I can't stand that fucking band. And the singles I've heard so far just sound like In Flames, incredibly fucking mid, and I expect the rest of the album to be incredibly fucking mid. But who knows, maybe I'll be surprised. I'll also be reviewing This Is Why by Paramore, even though they haven't made anything good since Riot. The Jaws of Life by Pierce the Veil, because I need a good laugh. Bible Bashers by Deicide, even though they haven't made anything relevant in almost 30 years. And also, I'll be reviewing Steel Panthers On the Prowl, because again, I need a good laugh. Now for my most anticipated albums in February of 2023. The first one is Anno 1696 by Insomnium. I'm also anticipating Warlocks Grim and Withered Hags by Hellripper. I've really liked what I've heard from that one so far. And my most anticipated album for February of 2023 is Judgment Day by Love Bites. These girls are a pretty big name in the power metal scene. I love the singles so far. Judgment Day is just fucking heavy as balls, and I can't wait to hear the rest of the album. So those are the albums you can look forward to me reviewing in the next episode.